Okay, so a lot of times clients come to me and they think they are dismissive avoidant, or their partner has convinced them they're dismissive avoidant, or somebody comes to me who is a fearful avoidant thinking their partner is a dismissive avoidant or DA, and a lot of times they are not. So how do we tell the difference, okay? Sometimes you might be watching some of these videos, you might have taken one of those assessments online, and a lot of times those are very, very inaccurate. They have not been tested. They have not been studied for validity, for accuracy, to actually show that they are testing the thing they're designed to test. They have not gone through that scientific research to make them valid. But all of that to say that a lot of times fearful avoidants who lean very dismissive often can be confused easily with a dismissive avoidant. So how do we tell the difference? Leslie Wells, Connection Coach here. I help individuals heal, thrive, improve, repair, and connect more deeply in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. So part of the reason I think a lot of people think that they are a dismissive avoidant, or they believe their partner is a dismissive avoidant, is because they see that avoidant side, and particularly when it comes to conflict, especially when it comes to conflict. So if you are a person who is with someone who is a fearful avoidant who leans very avoidant or very dismissive, then you're going to experience their avoidant side a lot during conflict, and that inner experience is going to help you sort of think that they're a dismissive avoidant. And we need to be very careful, because what we think is happening from our experience, from our perception, is not actually what's happening within them internally, and we cannot take just one factor into play when we look at whether or not someone has a certain attachment style. There are multiple things that come into attachment style, so let's get into what those are. So we cannot take one piece of the puzzle and make them a dismissive avoidant. So if we look at a dismissive avoidant, there's three things that usually trigger them, okay? There's closeness and intimacy, there is commitment, and there is conflict. And we can also add to that expectation and the need for space. So if they don't get that space, then they are then triggered and they feel like they're getting enmeshed in the relationship. And that is why closeness, commitment, and conflict all trigger them. So, and they struggle with vulnerability too. So we can't take just one piece of the puzzle and label them as dismissive avoidant. Fearful avoidants also have an avoidant side. And someone who is with a fearful avoidant leaning anxious, or an anxious partner, if they are fearful avoidant, they are going to lean more into their avoidant side. So a lot of times I see fearful avoidants who lean very dismissive, and those are the ones that really lean on the far end of the spectrum, right between like fearful avoidant who leans dismissive and dismissive avoidant, that really confuse their partners or are confused themselves. One of the ways that we can sort of determine whether or not this is a fearful avoidant or a dismissive avoidant is to look at their childhood, okay? So we know for fearful avoidants, they typically have some sort of chaos or trauma in their childhood. So one of the things that I will look for when I'm working with a client is the level of trauma that they had in their childhood. Some of the some of the fearful avoidants that lean really dismissive that I work with have extremely traumatic, chaotic childhoods. And so that's sort of a cue for me to hone in onto everything else that they say or part of their story. Dismissive avoidants typically grow up without emotional attunement or emotional neglect. Now, for a fearful avoidant, they can also experience that in their childhood as part of their chaos. If there's nothing but chaos, if they have a parent with substance abuse issues or mental health challenges, or there's any kind of abuse that's going on in the house, or if there's a parent who has died, or a divorce where they have taken off and they don't see that, if there's infidelity with their parents, if there's harshness, if there's a physical discipline that's very harsh, or unpredictability in their parents, those parents in those times may also not be able to provide emotional attunement. A lot of times I see situations where one person in the family, like whether it's the husband or the wife, takes off and leaves, and the other parent is a fearful avoidant who does not have the capacity to show up and teach emotional attunement or be emotionally attuned to the child. So they can grow up and become a fearful avoidant who also wasn't modeled and didn't get to really experience emotional attunement a lot with their caregiver. So one of the big distinctions between an FA and a DA is that the DA really is triggered by intimacy, whereas the FA, even those that lean avoidant, deeply, deeply desire intimacy and connection. So let me give you an example. I have a lot of clients who are FAs who lean very dismissive that actually look like DAs sometimes in conflict. but not other areas. So here's what it looks like. They may be someone who in conflict really shows up with defensiveness originally, and then they go into this like severe flight response where they want to leave the conversation or the conflict, and then they go into a freeze response where they are stuck in alexithymia. They cannot tell you how they feel, they cannot form a thought, they cannot express anything, they cannot show up for you. They are frozen in full trauma response. But they can also be someone who has desperately wanted connection, has wanted a soulmate, who in their childhood or their younger years deeply desired it to the point of being rescued by other people to give them that intimacy. Maybe they had chaos in their own family, they had unpredictability, but they thought of somebody else. They fantasized regularly about someone that they did feel emotionally connected to coming in and rescue them and saving them. Or these are people who, like typical FAs, get really enmeshed in relationships very fast. Like in the romantic honeymoon stage of a relationship, they connect deeply and they connect fast and they want that. And so that is not how a DA shows up, but that is how an FA who leans very dismissive can show up. They can show up desiring intimacy. They can show up with vulnerability. They can show up talking about their feelings. FAs are very deep feelers. Even if they are frozen in conflict or they've reached a place of full shutdown because they feel helpless and hopeless in the relationship, so they've gone into their avoidant side, they can spend that space for years. I actually have FAs who lean very dismissive for years who are shut down to their family or their spouse because they are just overwhelmed with the high reactivity of the more anxious partner, and they feel like it's a hopeless situation where they can't have a voice safely. And so they will go into a free state or functional free state for a very, very long time, but they still deeply desire that connection, that intimacy, and they are still full of feelings. They are not suppressing their feelings. They are just not outwardly expressing them. So you will see over the years, and you can't just take like a small time frame, you will see over the years with an FA who leans very avoidant that there typically is still that push-pull that you see with an FA. Whereas with a DA, you're going to see that gradual pull away that just kind of continues and goes on, and they don't really ever lean back in and want more intimacy or desire more connection and closeness. Also, the FA will commit early in the relationship. They are ready to get married. They are ready to settle down. They are ready to move in together. They commit very early in the relationship, where you will not see that with a DA. Their core wounds are also very different. The core wound of a dismissive avoidant is I am defective, I am broken. So why even bother trying, because I'm broken, so I'm never gonna get it right. The core wounds of a fearful avoidant are the betrayal wounds and the fear of abandonment. And so their internal dialogue is usually centered around I have to do more to prove and earn my worth and earn my love, and then maybe I won't be abandoned or betrayed. So there's different core wounds and there's different triggers as well. The biggest trigger for the FA, even if they lean very dismissive, is I'm not seen, heard, understood, and a lot of times validated. And then for the DA, it is again that intimacy, that closeness, that connection, that commitment, the expectations, all of those things. So they have different core wounds, they have different triggers, and they have different childhoods. If you have a fearful avoidant who leans very avoidant, you may still see that shutdown and conflict. You may still see distance come between you guys because they feel hopeless or disconnected already, or they perceive that you have betrayed them for a while, or repeated paper cuts over the years have sent them staying in that avoidant space. You will also sometimes see fearful avoidants who lean more avoidant that are still like overthrowing themselves into work and hobbies and deprioritizing you, but it's not because they are triggered by those things. It's because they feel unseen, unheard, unvalidated, or because they feel betrayed by you and they have reached their limit. It is disconnection for the fearful avoidant that will lead them to pull back, whereas it is connection for the DA, too close of a connection, that will cause them to pull back. Another thing is for the DA, look at their trauma responses. Dismissive avoidants typically go into flight or freeze response. Anytime they have a fight response, it is usually very short-lived, and it's a little bit of defensiveness before they spring into that flight and freeze response. Whereas the fearful avoidant will have all of the trauma responses. They will have fawn, they will have flight, they will have freeze, and they will have fight response. And you will see all of them come out at different points in time in different situations. So if you are trying to figure out if you are a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant who leans very dismissive, then consider a few things. Go back and revisit the childhood of yourself or your partner if you're trying to figure out what their attachment style is. And then ask yourself, what are their core wounds? What are their trauma responses? Again, what that childhood looks like. And then ask yourself if you have experienced this push-pull that goes on, and try to figure out their internal dialogue. Do they have an internal dialogue that just says, I'm broken, I'm not gonna be enough, so why try? Or do they still try to lean back in and have a dialogue of, I need to try more, I need to do more, I need to lean in differently? And notice the things that trigger them. That is a huge cue into which way that you lean, is the things that actually trigger you and send you into your trauma responses. I hope this provides some insight if you were on the fence and trying to figure out which one you are. I get a lot of people that come to me thinking they are DA, and in fact, they are actually not DA.